we might as well just start. It's almost time anyway, and I'm sure
Cool.
you have a busy day for the rest of the day. I don't want to keep you too long. And I really do appreciate you like getting on the podcast with us.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm really thanking to Gina as well for scheduling it. I didn't know I had to go through her to ask you.
Yeah.
I was like, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. That makes sense.
It's actually a newer kind of social policy kind of thing that they want all of the things scheduling people to go through community
managers
and stuff like that. Yeah, so that everybody is in the loop. They have checks and balances that they go through and stuff like that. So they want to make sure that they're the ones who schedule anybody. So.
I guess we'll start. Yeah, so this is the 25th ESOU podcast, and over the last however many podcasts we've done, we featured players, and this is the first time that we're featuring a developer. And your official title, I think, at ZOS is ZeniMax Studios is lead PvE encounter designer, or is it lead encounter designer?
Lead encounter designer, yeah.
So what does that entail? Does that include basically all PvE, right?
So I have 3 teams that are under me. I have the dungeon team, which is what I was in charge of before, but I also have the encounter team, which is the overland encounter team. They handle all overland encounters plus delves, public dungeons, that kind of stuff. And then the monster team, so any new monster that goes in game. So I like to say that pretty much if you fight something in PvE in our game, it's going to be handled by one of my teams.
Okay. Where did the trials fall in under those 3 categories?
The dungeon team. The dungeon team handles.
Oh, okay.
The dungeon team handles trials, arenas, and dungeons. So pretty much all instance-based combat.
That's pretty.
I feel
cool.
like they've got a lot more to do than the overland people, right?
No,
probably not.
It's hilarious that people don't realize how much the overland team does. It's not just all of the overland encounters that you're going to see. All justification is handled through the encounter team, which means you're walking through places. If there's hidey holes, there's places you can trespass. That's all done. The guards are placed by them. All delves, all public dungeons, all group bosses, all of the objectives, and as well as like main quest stuff as you're going through there. Anytime you fight anything, that's going to be done by the encounter team. And one of the little known things that they do that no people realize, they placed all the resource nodes. So when you go out into the world and you're, I know, right? This is what I'm saying. It's like it's this massive amount. If you look at the footprint of work that's done by those 2 teams, it's really the encounter team has a big footprint on the game. They have less quote unquote releases than the dungeon team, because the dungeon team has the 2 dungeon packs plus the trial. So they have a release, pretty much every quarter. Whereas the overland encounter team will do bookend. They'll do the chapter in the middle of the year, and then they'll do the DLC at the end of the year, and that's pretty much what they handle. But yeah, it's a big group for sure.
Yeah, and that's part.
And there's more people on the overland encounter team than there are on the dungeon team.
Oh, okay. Oh. And this is part of why I wanted to always talk to at least one of the devs, because I think, because I've had the privilege of, the whole classroom program and stuff like that, ESO stream team, to kind of see an insight into like the dev work. Whether you see on the ESO forums or Twitter or wherever else, people really think game development is like really like simple. Or like...
It is. It's really easy. All we do is we add the good mechanics, and we don't add the bad ones. That's just pretty much the rule of game design. Yeah.
All right. Sure. Okay.
Outsource it on Fiverr,
Yeah.
Okay. So it's easy. All right.
Yeah, it's pretty easy.
All right. Sure. All right. But yeah. Part of the reason is, we always have, people like, oh, why aren't they fixing these bugs? And they're putting out skins or whatever. But those are 2 entirely different groups of people.
Way different teams.
Incredibly different teams.
Right. And to be honest, you really don't want the encounter team putting out skins and the team that's doing skins fixing encounter bugs. You really don't want those 2 things to mix. So yeah, we're very segmented into our specialities in the game. So yeah, different teams are going to handle completely different the aspects of the game for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, for the rest of the podcast, I didn't get into nitty gritty of all PvE things related. But before we do that, let's just kind of warm up to it. And some people had questions for you that I took. And it's not really related to ESO strictly, but like, for example, do you have like a favorite pastime outside of gaming?
There's a couple, and I run cyclical on some of these where I'll pick them up and put them down. Warhammer, I've been involved with. I've played Warhammer 40K since like 1990 or something
Damn.
like that. So
Okay.
like, yeah, but I've like built and sold armies and stuff like that. So I don't really have all the stuff that I used to have, but I'm still pretty heavily invested. Which I think if you play Warhammer, you're heavily invested. But it's just very much a pastime that requires that kind of investment. But I play a lot of Warhammer comics and movies. I've always been a huge movie buff, so I really like to. The pandemic has kind of slowed that, which is painful because I really like to go to the movies. But when the pandemic hit, not being able to go to theaters and kind of see stuff, I was like, yeah, that kind of hit hard. But yeah, those are my two big hobbies, I think, outside of.
What's your go-to theater snack? I feel like you're a hot
popcorn.
dog.
Popcorn for
I'm
sure.
hot dog. Yeah, it's always gonna be popcorn. And it's funny because when I was younger, I'm like, let's get like Reese cups or gummy bunnies and stuff like that. But like as my taste has become more refined, it's really the movie theater popcorn with the movie theater butter for sure. And I also used to drink like the really sugary drinks, but now I like go in with like a bottle of water and like try not to touch it because otherwise halfway through the movie I'm like have to run out and use the bathroom, so I missed that 5 minutes or so.
I like to go with popcorn and blue slushy or icy, whatever they call it.
That's
what you want.
That would be a wreck to my stomach if I did that. For sure.
I guess while we're on the topic of food, somebody was curious. Like, do you have a particular fast food or food in general that's your favorite? If you had to pick just one.
I'm pretty what the kids nowadays would call basic. Steak and potatoes, really. I really love my favorite steak. My favorite cut of meat is a ribeye, so I really love steak and potatoes. I actually just smoked some ribs the other day, which I really dig ribs too. But it's pretty much steak and potatoes. But if we're gonna go fast food, so I haven't had it in a long time. But my favorite fast food ever, and this was when I was much younger, when I lived in the West Coast, was Carl's Jr.'s Western Bacon Cheeseburger, which is 2 patties. This is for Olabo because he lives in the land of rain. So like it's 2 hamburger patties with cheese and then an onion ring on top and barbecue sauce.
That sounds so good right now. I'm so hungry.
Oh, they are so good. They were so good. Yeah, it was really good. So yeah, I used to eat those like every day. So that was my favorite fast food burger.
You guys send us some pictures of that sometime. Oh man,
they're good. They're good.
Yeah.
It's funny because our kitchen at work will every once in a while they'll have like a special and stuff, and every time they put like they call it a cowboy burger, whatever they put the cowboy burger, I'm like, oh, getting that with the fries. Let's do it.
Damn, that's so good. Okay, I don't wanna get too hungry here. So let's move on for now. So kind of going back to what you said about the encounter design being split into, I guess, 3 different categories: overland, dungeon trials, and of course, stuff monsters. Like that. Right, monsters. So we've seen as players that every dungeon and trial tells a story, right? So how much of that narrative goes into designing the bosses and encounters, or do you have to like consult the lore team too and stuff like that? Because Alywels and I read this interview you did with your fellow coworker about designing bosses. I think you kind of mentioned in the interview, but didn't get really into it, about how you have to kind of like take into account lore and stuff, or things that make sense for monsters or bosses to do, like in terms of mechanics or attacks.
Right.
Like, could you like give an example of that, like how it works?
Yeah. So the story, whenever we do a trial, we start from the story perspective of what kind of story are we telling here, and what is the point of this? And then I usually create like an overarching document. It's called a zone design document, which kind of gives the outline of like, this is kind of the story for the dungeon, what we want to tell and stuff like that. And then I really kick it to the designers to come up with where they're going to go with the particular bosses and stuff. And they are the ones who take a look at the story and how the different bosses are going to fit into these things. Where we consult with lore is oftentimes us coming in and saying, we want to do this. So we'll use the latest one, Dreadsail Reef, for an example, with Tideborn Talaria. Sorry for people that haven't gotten to the last boss yet, but we wanted to sell the story of this fleet queen, basically, selling her soul or bringing forth this awesome, like, watery creature that has been giving power and stuff like that. And that was where we consult with lore very much to say, hey, this is what we want to do. Does this make sense? And what's the best way to show this? Another thing with the lore is, there's very few times where we would go to lore and it's hard nosed. I mean, there are some. It's like, I'm gonna explain what happened to the Dwemer, and then I'm like, nah.
Okay, yeah.
But for the most part, like, when we say this is what we want to do, and part of what going to the lore team and working with our lore master is looking for the justifications in the lore and the justifications in the world for why that makes sense. And we've been doing this long enough that we're not usually coming out of left field. You know what I mean? Like, whoa, this is doesn't make any sense. Usually there's some type of justification we can use for it and stuff. And that's working with that team to say, this is what we want to do. How do we go about explaining this and doing this?
Okay. So, for example, like, I guess Rakat's lore is, he's Dramathra, and would Lunar Pans kind of have something to do with that, I guess, like, in terms of mechanics?
Right. And that's where we take a look at, and that was Shane who designed that boss, and he took a look at the lore of the Dramathra, being the Dark Moon and all this other stuff, and really leaning into that. Also, the space you go to, kind of in the over there, with the dancing cats and stuff like that. That was born out of lore for what the Khajiit call the Dark Moon, or the Khajiit that followed Dark Moon, Lorkaj, what they call the Bent Dance. So that's where you get the idea of the dancing cats in the background or in the over there, is because that's what those followers of that lore actually do. And then we take that and we kind of incorporate that into a mechanic where you see these kind of crazy cats dancing. You're like, what are you doing? And if you know the lore, you're like, oh, they're doing the bent dance. I get it.
Okay. All right. So with the whole narrative, with the whole lore thing, I think some players have noted when the Craglorns came out with Sanctum Ophidia, Aetherian Archive, and Hellraw Citadel, so the stories in those trials with the warrior, the serpent, even the thief, they were central to the plot of the story of Craglorn. But some people feel like the trial narratives are more adjacent rather than like kind of wrapping up the whole story of the entire zone. So is there a reason you guys kind of shifted away from that?
Part of the reason is because we don't want players to feel like they are pigeonholed into doing group or large group content in order to get the whole story. You didn't really need to do that for Craglorn. You can kind of get the story. You actually fight the warrior and the mage and serpent otherwise, But we still wanted to it also frees up the designs from our perspective of being able to do stuff that isn't necessarily beholden to the direct main story or something like that, so that we can free up our designs a little bit, as well as tell a cool, awesome story that is exactly what you said, tangential to the overarching story, and people can play that entire chapter without saying, "Oh, well, I didn't do the trial, so I didn't get the full story." That, and when we did Craglorn was an adventure zone, so it was like, the original design behind Craglorn, which we kind of like changed and gone back with one Tamriel to make more accessible. We changed that a little bit. So
it's like the prototype, basically, kind of.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I guess while we're on this topic, has the team ever come up with like incredibly wild ideas that they wanted to implement for mechanics or boss fights, but they couldn't because of maybe time or technological limitations?
Yeah, that's actually a really large question, and that there's always stuff that we can't implement. So as part of the process, what we do is the designers will sit down and they'll throw everything into this document, their design documents, and say, this is what we want to do. And then we sit down with our the various teams, FX, animation, audio, and we say, this is what we want to do. And they tell us, oh, this is how long it'll take to do it. And then we just compare that versus how long we actually have. And we say, oh, okay, we're going to cut some stuff out of this. But there are some other ones that are really, really big things that we wouldn't. Like, I think that at one point we had talked about having a fight on the back of a dragon or something crazy like that for, for Sunfire and stuff. Yeah, it was crazy stuff that we were like, how would we do this? And then not possibly. So we were like, okay, well, let's not do that. Yeah. That would be, I think, the biggest one where we were like, let's explore that. What's funny is we have one of the designers on my team, Sean, is really, really has tremendous amount of knowledge about the game and how to build things encounter-wise, and he's really good about prototyping stuff up. So even the last boss in Rock Grove, the rising lava plane, we originally were like, when he proposed that, I was like, I don't know that we're going to be able to do that. It's going to look... And then he was like, all right. And then like the next week, he's like, well, I got it prototyped in. Let's take a look. And I was like, whoa. All right. And then we did that, and we were like, okay, we can work with this. We can refine this for sure. So, yeah, it was very, very much a... sometimes we think that we won't be able to do something, and then one of the designers will say, oh, I go ahead and prototyped it, and this is what it looks like. So,
Okay. So you mentioned fighting on the back of a dragon.
World of Warcraft had that.
Oh, okay.
There was a fight on top of a dragon. It was a bit weird. It didn't really feel like you're on the back of a dragon. It made you feel very seasick as well.
And that's actually kind of like where sometimes you'll think of stuff and you're like, it'd be really cool if we do this, and then you kind of start to see it and you're like, but is that fun? Is that really is that a lot of fun? And so some of the things get cut for that, where it just doesn't feel like it's going to be fun, or how it's going to work, or is it really going to feel like this?
Yeah.
What are some other things you guys have scrapped?
You might use them again though. I'm not sure whether you feel like
there's some things that a lot of times we do that. We'll back burner stuff where we'll create this thing and we'll say, this is cool and this is what I want to do. And as we get through and we scope and we take a look and we go, this just isn't hitting right now, or this isn't going to work. Let's put that on the back burner. I think a good example is of where it came back later is Halls of Fabrication and Frostvault. So if you look at Halls of Fabrication, the final boss in there, which was Assembly General, and that was originally, if you look at Frostvault and how that turned out, that was originally how that fight was going to work. Which was you were going to have the two arms that you were going to have to fight, and you were going to have to break them off individually and stuff like that. And it wasn't just all kind of damage the guy and stuff like that. And then the limitations we had there were primarily tech, where we were still working on the tech for what we call large monster tech or composite monster tech. So it was still whenever you develop those kind of things in tandem, where you're like, I'm developing this boss and I'm developing this whole new tech. That there's all kinds of friction with. There was a lot of extra hours that put in there. I know the designers, me included, I think we put in some weekends and stuff like that, where we were just like, we got to get this stuff in. And then, so we had to pull back on the design to say, okay, this doesn't work how we're going to want to. And then later on down the line, we were doing Frostvault, and we said, Shane, again, the guy who did Rakat, also did the last boss in Frostvault, and he was like, well, let's see about re-envisioning this and see if we can bring this up to snuff. So going back to that well and kind of using that same monster and then refining that tech a little bit so that attacking the individual arms did work, made for that good fight, and it allowed us to kind of bring that tech forward.
Yeah. Okay. God, imagine 12-person Skeevatrons. That would be... awful.
Right. That wasn't the part that we actually scrapped, but but it was actually mainly just the attacking 2 arms. But yes, 12 Skeevatons running through the.
Oh no! Here we go. He's got the idea for the next one.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Oh man. So this is a big question here. I think we'll talk a lot about this actually. So one of the challenges that we, the players, are often faced with, and this kind of is related to the project Vitality we've been trying to do recently, is like kind of bridging the gap between newer players, just starting out, or just kind of getting to the trials or raids, the concept of raiding, which is for a lot of ESO players like their first experience, because this is their first MMO as well.
Right.
And then bridging the gap between those people and the more experienced or optimized teams pushing out these incredible achievements like trifectas or world records. Like, and then for the dev team, I wonder how like you find the balance when you design these encounters, design these dungeons or trials in veteran and hard mode content when you have such a huge disparity between these two ends of the player spectrum. Like, how do you do that?
It's tough. I'll tell you
yeah,
that.
for sure.
I mean, that's the tough part. We kind of rely on we have a really awesome QA group that we rely on that's really dedicated to dungeons, run by a guy by the name of David, and they are fantastic at what they do, and getting us different levels of players. But as far as moving things forward and stuff, we kind of adjust and try to make mechanics that account for what players can do as they get better at the game. So as players become more successful, get better at the game, find out new tricks and stuff, we try to adjust our mechanics to do that. It is a tough balance where we don't say, or we try not to just make everything a DPS race. It's like, oh, well, it's a DPS race, and if you have higher DPS, you're going to do this stuff. I think Dreadsail is a really good example of it does not benefit you having ungodly DPS,
right?
Because you're going to end up pushing things too fast and too quickly. And those are a lot of those experiments that we've gone back to try to do, is to take a look and say, all right, what is it going to happen if your DPS comes in much higher than this, or your DPS comes in, too low and stuff like that, and make the mechanics kind of fit for those kind of those desperate groups. But yeah, it's tough to adjust to as players are playing. And one thing is me and I know there's other designers that are involved in the meetings when combat is talking about, this is what we're doing, and this is a new thing, and this is how we're going to present challenges, or these are the new item sets and stuff like that. So we have a pretty good idea of where they're going with things and how it's going to impact the game. And our opinions are not just discounted. Like if they come up with an item set idea and stuff like that, we will chime in and we'll say, well, how's this going to play when tanks have this, or DPS is doing this, or what if 12 players have this, or what if one guy has this, and how is that going to add, how much DPS is this going to add, and stuff like that. So we try to push forward all of those kind of concerns that we have for balance.
I mean, do you start with the hard mode and then dial it back, or do you start with?
It depends on the designer. Different designers will do it different ways. I know a lot of the designers. I encourage usually starting with the hard mode. I encourage saying, make this as hard as you possibly can, and then we can take out mechanics. Because it's going to be much easier to just say, okay, this isn't a mechanic that's going to be in veteran, or this isn't going to be a mechanic that's going to be in normal, than it is to bail this counter and say, this feels good in veteran. What are you going to add for hard mode? It's going to be much easier to dial back. So that's usually where we kind of push our designers and kind of coach them to say, hey, you should start by making this really friggin' hard, and then we can pull stuff back. And that's usually where it comes in from imbalance, where we'll sit there and start playing it. When we start our initial balance passes, or even playing as a team before it even gets to balance, we'll start playing and we'll say, this is really hard. This mechanic that you have here may require too much group coordination in veteran, so why don't we save this for hard mode?
Yeah. I got the sense from that in Dreadsail Reef for sure, especially during the PTS cycle. It seemed like you guys added a whole bunch of stuff, and then you started dialing it back. And then for last year, for Rockroot, it felt like the opposite, where, okay, it's not enough. But then when we started doing hard modes, it's like, what the heck is going on here? What's this portal? It's completely different. So, yeah, it was interesting to experience for sure.
The portal thing was funny in Rockroad because that was originally, before we got to balance, that was part of that was just part of the veteran.
Right.
Okay. And then as we went through balance, we were like, let's just, what is this like if this is just hard mode? That's a huge escalation in difficulty for Bus A. So we were like, okay, let's do that. And then that's how it kind of all shook out, where it all was like, okay, this is because that fight felt great in veteran without the portal.
Right.
And then hard mode is where we can kind of throw everything in the kitchen sink in it. So we can really, really like challenge the players like, all right, you've seen this in veteran, now now take it up a notch. So
okay, that's pretty interesting. And so with the recent trials like Rockgrove and Dreadsail, like with the Hardmans especially, it's been much more substantially difficult, I think, and challenging for even like the endgame progression teams. Especially when you compare it to previous trials like Kyne's Aegis. Was that like a conscious decision on your part or the team's part, in terms of in regards to like the spike in difficulty that players experienced between these two trials?
I think part of it's just the philosophy that we have, where we say, looking at it from the 50,000 foot view, is we say trials. There's players that love to do trials and love to raid, and they get one bite at the apple every year. So they get one trial a year at the moment. So in the chapter, so it is okay to make that as hard as possible.
Okay.
To give them a chance to chew on. Now, the differences between Kynes and like Rockgrove and Dreadsail is more like sometimes like development is not an exact science,
right?
So sometimes we're like, oh, we think this is going to be really, really challenging, and then it goes, and we're like, okay, it wasn't quite as challenging as we wanted, but we kind of, as we refine our craft and get better at these kind of things, you start to see that more, where we start to say, every time we release anything, it's a learning process for us as much as it is for players. We learn how they do things, how they tackle things, what they're going to do, and that arms us kind of for the future to say, okay, this is what players can handle. And what's funny is we always have this discussions between me and Jeremy, who's my the lead content designer, and Rich, where we'll sit down and they'll say, they're like, man, this is really difficult. Are you sure? And I will say that to everybody, I'm one of the biggest player advocates for saying, no, they'll get it. Trust me.
Yeah.
Well, how are we going to learn? I'm like, they're going to learn. They're going to die to it, and then they're going to learn. They're going to say, what is this? And they're going to learn. And I really put a lot of faith in where I think that the players will pick up and learn these mechanics, as long as they have the mentality. And it's funny because you guys have gotten better, and the progression mindset has gotten better for a lot of people when they do trials in ESO. Whereas, initially you did the 3 Craglorns and then Maw of Lorcaj. Maw of Lorcaj was really tough, and people put it down. I think it was 5 months before the hard mode was beaten in that one. So then he started to put it down and stuff. But I like to say Maw of Lorcaj was the first time we taught players how to really do a trial in our game. Right. And it just progressed from there. And then you've seen it every time where some people put stuff down and I was like, this is too tough. This is impossible. We're not gonna be able to do this. And now we release trials on PTS and even live, and people are like, no, we'll figure it out. People, it's not uncommon to hear, we had a 3-hour progression run where we didn't get the final boss down, but I think we're in a good spot and we can do this. And that's what I like to hear, is like people that are like coming into this as a puzzle to solve, and really tackling it and having that mindset of, I need to learn how to do this, and then we'll get it.
Yeah, that's definitely a great attitude to have. Although some people, I think, these days don't have that.
Yeah, they'll get it though. I have faith,
for sure.
I have faith in them. They'll get it.
I know people that still died to the blob in Sanctum Ophidia hard mode on the last boss, like 6 years later, or whatever.
People are still on the shield row.
People
are still doing World Shaper in VSO.
Yeah.
People still don't know how to run backroom in VMO. It's crazy.
It is. I mean, people don't. There's people that haven't been through full cycles in Maw, and
it's a shame.
It is a shame.
I guess there's so many things I want to talk about just from this part of the conversation. Oh my gosh. Okay, so you mentioned the whole you take a bite of the apple once a year in regards to trial content. So I think a lot of people are kind of looking back with rose-tinted glasses back at the mini trials. Remember when you did VHOF, and then after that it was like VAS, and then after that it was immediately Somerset. Are you guys gonna ever do like a mini trial again?
It's not out of the question. What it is we need to. It depends on how things kind of line up. So we don't always do a quarter 4 release, and that's really based on the size of the team and the amount of work that we have and stuff like that. So if you look at, but a good example of that is we didn't do a quarter 4. We didn't do a Deadlands release, and that was because we were really at that time nose to the grindstone on Dreadsale, and there's a lot of meat to Dreadsale. So those high-level discussions that we have of saying this is what the team is working on, and this is how much time it's going to take us to do that, and do we want to break away to kind of do these other things? Now, I will say that stuff like Asylum and Cloud Rest and stuff like that, they're not out of the question. It's just a matter of timing and how much time the team has to get things done.
Okay, that's fair. Because I think a lot of people were wanting those mini trials again, which is funny because initially people didn't like them.
Yeah, I remember people.
But now
saying,
people love them.
This is all we get for the year, like one bots, but now people miss them. So,
yeah, I think it's more popular on console because with full trials, they don't have the advantage of add-ons, like we did, where we can gear swap as we progress through the trial. Yeah, but in the main trial, you just go in with one setup, you're done. That's really it.
Yeah, and we can, and like I said, we could take a look at that. I know the last quarter 4 we did was Vadashran. So, and that was a solo arena and stuff like that. But that's what whenever we evaluate some of these things, it's partly of like, what haven't we done in a while, what we think would be good, and that kind of stuff. I think Murkmire was the one before that, which was Blackbird's Prison, which is the group arena and stuff. So, it's just a matter of how much time we have, and then can we put it all together and in the amount of time and still get a good experience for players.
That's fair enough. Oh, one thing I wanted to explore, unless Ollie has a question about all this.
I know it's something that people have suggested to me is, wouldn't it be great to have like a 2-player or like a different something other than 4 or 12 or 1? Is that something that's...
It would be. Originally when we did Maelstrom, we were in development, and we had started to develop from the perspective of we weren't sure if we were going to do 2-player or single player. But there was a tech component that wasn't kind of resolved at that point. And when we went to the tech team shortly afterwards, and we said, hey, what is this going to take, and what can we get and stuff. And when they took a look and they looked at the underlying code, it was really a tech limitation for 2-player content. So absent dedicating kind of like tech resources, which are not insignificant to get a limited 2-player type piece of content, it's not in the cards right now. So that's kind of like the hang up right now.
Yeah. Well, I've been sometimes do the 4-person arenas with 2 companions. That's pretty fun. That's about as close as we can get, I guess. For now.
Right.
Something you mentioned earlier too, with your work and coordination between all these different teams must be a headache, logistically speaking. But you also mentioned QA, and the player base has like all these like myths or like urban legends of the QA team, because they get their tidbits of information through word of mouth or on the forums, or maybe previously from Rich's streams. But like, is it true? Like, your QA teams go into trials, like vet trials, and do it on like blue gear, like
with no CP.
With blue gear, no CP, blue gear. That's true.
I think they have CP in trials, but in vet dungeons they have blue gear, no CP.
Okay.
They do vet dungeons that way.
Yeah. Yep. That was just one thing I've always wondered about, like if it's true or not. Yeah. Because I've heard about it. I'm like, is this true? Like,
for sure. And that's part of because when we go into these, the group that we're catering kind of for veteran, we want to make sure that we don't overshoot it. And our QA team has been playing the game for a very, very long time, and been testing our content for a very, very long time. And they also have somewhat of an advantage because they've been testing it all through development too. So we want to give them as many hindrances as possible for people coming in with fresh eyes. So they may know the mechanics, they know where not to stand, where to stand, but they don't quite have the DPS to overcome some of these things. So that's generally where we err on the side of, so that to make sure that they're testing from as close to a fresh eyes as possible.
Okay.
Do you think if you put them in like gold gear with max CP, they'd beat?
They'd absolutely destroy that. It wouldn't even be close.
What do you reckon they'd? Maybe we should do a 4v4 dungeon speedrun competition.
That's interesting. I don't know,
Okay.
but that might be interesting though.
I'd be up for it. Just saying.
Is it also true that they don't use add-ons for the trials?
They use damage meters.
Oh, okay.
But that is just as a self check on what they're doing. But for the most part, no, they don't use any other add-ons.
Okay. So you're basically saying that QA team is the best PvE team in the world if they can clear all the content without add-ons, without
Well, yes and no. I mean, I don't know that I would say that they're the best in the world. They're not getting world firsts on anything or anything like that. But they are there. They have a very. It's different when you're playing as a QA tester than when you're playing as a player.
Right.
So they're there. They're not. QA is not there to make sure everything works. QA is there to break shit.
Oh, okay.
And that's absolutely what they're trying to do every single time they play. They're there to break stuff and say, this is broken, or hey, I did this and this works right. Now they also give us balance questions or balance answers every time. We rely very heavily on our play sessions with our QA. So as a bit of behind the scenes for the last month before we're going to release anything. So if you look at where we're at now, you can kind of guess what they're doing. But for the month before, we have 3 days a week for at least 3 hours a day, where our developers are sitting with now virtually sitting with QA and watching them play through the content, and they are playing it over and over and over again, and resetting bosses and resetting content, and playing it over and over again. And our developers are making tweaks on the fly and stuff like that. So this is where I talk about, like, they have been playing it so much that it's not really. That's why we have to hinder them, because they've been playing it so much that it would be too much of an advantage of, like, you guys can come in there with full gold gear and all your CP and 3,600 points. And that's way too big an advantage that would put everybody way behind an 8 ball when they would come into it. So they just play it so much, and we take their feedback to heart whenever they give us feedback and say. A lot of times it's role based, so we'll sit there and we'll play and we'll go, okay, all right, Tank, how did you feel during this? Okay, that's great. Healer, what did you think that you were challenged? How much were you healing? Did you feel that you needed to spread around your heals, or did you needed to keep it on the main tank?
Right.
Or, how were your resources? DPS, did you feel this was, a good test of your skill? Did you have to stay in and out of? Was it advantageous to be close or far away, and all that other stuff? So.
Okay.
Is there exactly 12 of them?
For the trial, what do you mean? For the team?
I mean, yeah. Do you have like 12 QA testers for the trial? I guess.
Oh, like a full team.
They borrow. Okay. I think they borrow from other teams.
Oh, okay.
For the trial testing, they borrow from other teams. There are. I think there's definitely more than 4. Oftentimes I think they have close to 8. So usually for dungeons, I think they have 2 groups of 4. But they borrow from other teams that are competent. The other like people that have been playing for a while, usually the combat QA and stuff like that. So people that are well versed in how the game plays.
Okay. And this kind of relates to my next question in terms of the myth and also like dev design. So I've heard this since like 2016, but apparently a dev somewhere said, I don't know if it was you or somebody else, said like players, like we didn't, the way players do twins or did twins was not the way we intended it.
And that was a long time ago I said that, and that
you
was
said that?
like the first couple of, it was because the first couple of months, now everybody does it that way, so it's like everybody's like, hey, I heard that people don't do this like twins. It was the stack in the middle and have the 2 tanks on the outside. So that everybody could just AoE down the twins, basically, is how that was how QA had done it in testing and stuff. And it took a while for people to kind of start getting that strat to do that. But yeah, that was pretty much what it was. And at that time, nobody was doing it that way. And I had made that offhand comment, and then it became this legend of like, QA does it some amazing way that nobody's ever seen before. It's like, and I'm like, yeah, it's not like. I think people are like, what if we put him in the fountain? And I'm like, guys, this is not how this works. I don't know what you're talking. So yeah, that it became. But yeah, people had figured out kind of like the more efficient way to do it, and how QA had done it at that time. So they figured all that out now.
Yeah. So you're referring to the sword pushing strat, basically, where you have the two bosses in the middle. The one group doesn't get the gates because they have the dark heads, right? Is that the strat you're referring to? Is that the intended way of doing it, or like the QA did it back then?
No intended way to do it. It's more along the lines of as QA will find stuff and develop strategies and stuff. They're really good about that too, developing kind of strategies and stuff. And we have to evaluate a lot of times. Is this a strategy we want to hinder, and how would we hinder it? Because it makes the fight too easy. Like if it completely removes mechanics and stuff like that, you're like, okay, well, this becomes a broken way to do this. Or if it's a thing of like, no, we'll let that fly, and that looks good. And if people figure out how to do it this way, that might be more efficient, stuff like that. So, yeah, they figured that out in testing, and then have now it's legendarily the optimal way to do it.
Right. So I guess when you design the boss mechanics or something like that, the team obviously has like a counterplay in mind, right? For how you expect maybe players or even the QA to kind of tackle it on. Has there ever been like an instance where I guess players just kind of like super exceeded your expectations on how they would do the fight? A lot of times.
Example? They'll just be. I know some of the earlier examples was using barrier to increase your range. Which is one of those ones that we didn't account for when we first did it. Right. And I remember seeing it and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And that's another interesting discussion, because we have this thing where if somebody uses something in a brand new way we didn't intend, and we have to look at how are we good? Should we counteract this or shouldn't we counteract this? I know that Rockrove Misform was the classic form used. So, that was one of those ones that we needed to engage other teams to kind of look at, because there wasn't a good solution design-wise for us to do that, other than to just completely like, you just can't use Misform. We didn't want to do that design-wise, because whenever possible, we want players to use their tips and tricks. We've actually had this quite a lot where we've gone into balance or design discussions, and we'll be fighting a particular boss or a fight or something, and then like it'll put a debuff on you or a negative effect or something like that, and then it's not cleansable. And there are very valid design reasons why things would work that way. Okay. But I think we had one not too long ago in design and in testing where it was like 3 different debuffs and none of them were cleansable. And what we came out of that was like, we can't do that. I mean, there's two, like, allow people to use their abilities as much as possible. We got to get people to use their abilities, and you just need to design around these cleanse and purifies and stuff like that. I think the initial first implementation of Halls of Fabrication that we were working on in the with the Hunter Killer Fabricants was that poison wasn't cleansable and stuff. And then as we went through and we started playing, and we were like, yeah, this just feels bad. This feels like a thing that I should be able to cleanse. And we just have to design around it and make the fight harder and account for people having cleanse. So there's a lot of those things of evaluating, does this thing need to negate a player ability? One of the big examples that we have of and players have just learned to accept it was, so we'll go back all the way back to before the game launched. We started doing dungeons, and we had put in immunities to stun for monsters and bosses and stuff. And there was somebody who had come in and was like, well, what is this? Why are they immune to stuns? I should be able to use all my abilities. I should be able to do these things. And we were like, as a dungeon team, we were like, yeah, but like, it's too tough to design around that kind of thing, and players will get it. This is again where I talk about players will get it. They will. They'll absolutely get it. And from the launch, and as you guys have seen, yeah, monsters are just, if you're in a dungeon, most of the monsters, or a lot of the monsters, all bosses are immune to stun. And players just like, yeah, that makes sense. You know what I mean? And
Right.
and that's kind of like making those conceits and those acceptance. And then as over the years, it just becomes a thing of like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
They're
I mean,
just
they still
immune to
get
that.
the off balance and stuff, so there is like
For sure.
Well,
And
I've
that's actually what we
noticed,
had to talk about. That's actually what we had to talk about to the combat team when they were doing these things of like, hey, these stuns are going to do, off balance. It's one of the things that I often bring up when we're talking about things when they're doing new item sets and new abilities and stuff. And like, oh, well, this is going to stun, and I'm like, well, what's that going to do to a dungeon boss? Because that ability is useless to a dungeon boss if it does this. So like, oh, well, it's still going to apply this stuff even if it doesn't stun them, or sometimes they'll build into, oh, if something is immune to stuns for whatever reason at this point, it's CC immune, then it'll do this effect and stuff, and that kind of like full circle, 360 design between all the different teams is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, recently with Dread Cell Reeve, the first boss, and also Corollary last boss, you can't roll dodge, right? Because you get that horrible thing. So I think that's something that's interesting as well. Like can't just rely on being able to do one thing. You have to learn how to block properly. You have to learn how to roll dodge.
It's me all the time. You know what's funny is when we first did Corollary in the first blush, and the knockback that you got from dodge rolling the heavy attack in Corollary was like massive. And we were doing tests with this was when every week we have what's called a director's play test. It's on one day, and that's usually me and Jeremy and Rob Garrett and Rich, and we'll play through whatever we're working on. So the first time we go into Corollary and we get to the final boss, and I know what's going to happen, so I usually the tank in these things. So I'm saying like this, and he goes to a heavy attack, and I dodge roll, and everybody gets knocked off into the water and waterfish to death. And they're like, "Oh my gosh!" And I'm just cackling madly. I was cracking up because I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is the biggest troll ever! This is so good." Yeah. So yeah, I was a big fan.
That sounds pretty fun to do.
It is.
You absolutely did that on purpose.
Yeah, for sure.
Going back to the misform thing in Rockrow, because players will ask me this, like how much, like, and you also mentioned all these different processes and the team's work and efforts to pretty much wrap it all together. How much does like player feedback account for in terms of like designing the boss fights and stuff like that, or even going back and I guess changing things on the PTS? Or
there's a couple things that so player feedback is very important throughout the entire process. A lot of times player feedback isn't, and this is nothing against player feedback, and by the way, keep giving feedback. This isn't, but a lot of times there's not an understanding of what's going on in the background. So when player feedback comes in and says, this is where I see the problem, that's usually really good, and it's actionable feedback where we can take a look and say, well, are we not messaging this right? Is this too hitting harder? Are players not seeing where this is coming from? Those kind of things, and we can evaluate as a team because we kind of know the nuts and bolts behind it for what's going on. When feedback that where players come in and they say, well, this is how you should fix it, without the underlying this is the problem, it forces us to kind of backwards engineer kind of like the solution proposed versus how it actually kind of works in game. It's really abstract way to say that, and it's tough to explain, but it's very, very helpful for us to say, if you come in and say, this is a problem I'm having, and I die to this, and this is happening, and this is too much, and that kind of stuff, because it allows us to take a look at all of the underlying mechanics and making sure that, and it could be that, like, there's something that's happening that isn't messaged right, and you could be masking a bunch of other things, and we can kind of discern that by saying, oh, okay, well, this isn't obviously communicated for this way, or something like that. So player feedback is absolutely massive for us in that regard.
I remember Kinra being far brighter than it is now, for example. You just couldn't see anything when it came out.
Yes. And that's a big one for us too, and that actually spurred what we have is we try to do is have item set visualization meetings where we sit down with the team that's doing item sets and we have them show us the effects that are going on, and we'll say, okay, this is cool, or ooh, this is a bit strong. What is this going to look like in a trial? And then we put together like a video of like, this is what it looks like when 8 people have this in a trial, and it's like, oh my gosh, So kind of feeding into that a little bit, where that feedback kind of spurred even like wholesale meetings that we have now, where we kind of tried to evaluate these with a bunch of different teams.
Yeah, I feel like Templar keeps getting nerfed like every year. They make it a little bit less bright. Poor Templars.
So just to clarify for the people watching and listening, so the best way we as players doing these trials on PTS or even like on live, the best way for us to give the feedback is just to present the problems.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Just tell us what the problem is, and just say, hey, this is, and then we can kind of reverse engineer and take a look and say, oh, okay, I see where the problem is here, and I see how we can potentially solve it. Even if it's well, you need to get this buff and that counteracts this mechanic. What's obvious that might not be obvious to you, and we can solve it that way, right? You know what I mean? Rather than this mechanic hits too hard and I don't know why it's killing me, and it's like, well, you're supposed to get this buff to counteract it, and you don't know that, so that's how we can solve this. You know what I mean? So yeah,
right. Yeah. I mean, I remember Dreadcell Reef again, the first boss, like the teleport when the boss would change to the other side and then immediately start channeling. That felt a little bit unfair, and then that was changed.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. And those are kind of little things too that we won't necessarily see. Again, our QA department has been in this from the start, so they can kind of see where the mechanics are and whatnot. So we may not see that instant channel being an issue, and then as players run into it, we go, oh, you know what? Yeah, that doesn't feel good, and that's great feedback to give us a specific problem and say this is an issue. One thing about Dreadsail Reef, the funny part is when we first implemented it, that teleport did not have the little orbs.
Oh, okay. No indication.
So like the dude just was teleporting around, and you had to just guess where the hell he was going to be.
Yeah.
And then in balance, we were like, that's really cumbersome and painful.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Maybe should have kept it just to make it harder.
Yeah, right.
Wait, did he still look towards where he was going to port to?
They would know because they knew it was the quadrants, yes, and he would still look towards it. And there was still the quadrants, but you didn't know where in that quadrant he was going to be. So it was just like, yeah, it was rough. It was rough.
And this kind of goes. This next thing I guess I want to bring up kind of goes back to an earlier thread of the conversation we were on in regards to what you were saying about players gaining more familiarity and skill throughout their time in ESO. I mean, this game came out in 2014, right?
It did.
A fair amount of us are still around from 2014 or before that, even beta, right? And I guess you kind of talked about how it is very challenging to kind of like make content for both the experienced and inexperienced players at the same time. So I guess in regards to new content, like, or even old content, like, will you like how do you like handle that in terms of design or even adjustments? Because a lot of people have been telling me, oh, Nephis, why don't they make Craglorns harder? And I think we had a discussion about this years ago. Like, I think it was our first conversation we had in Council Raiders, right? When I agreed with you, and people are gonna hate me for this, that they shouldn't buff or make Craglorns harder because that's stepping stones. So I guess like a lot of people are suggesting now, what about third mode of difficulty? Is that a possibility?
There's a lot of things that go into that are beyond just numbers. There's a lot of things that go into difficulty modes and stuff like that go just beyond numbers. When you start talking about third modes and stuff like that, there has to be an underlying reward mechanism,
right?
To generate players wanting to do this content. I know there's a lot of people, and we hear this feedback all the time. It's like, oh, if it's harder, I'll just do it, even if I don't get anything for it. And I'm like,
Well,
But will you?
For how long?
Some
For
will.
a week?
Will you?
Some will.
And there's not an insignificant amount of design work to go ahead and up those kind of things. And I'm not putting this all on the reward mechanism, by the way, either.
Mhm.
But it is a major component for wanting to do that, and then coming up with a whole new reward schema for
Right.
getting players to do that kind of stuff. Not to mention, who is that really for is really what it comes down to as well. Like the Kraglorn trials kind of stand up on their own, and they are very much your first blush with doing trials in ESO, and it's a good starter experience to do that. It wouldn't be a situation where we create all new sets, and where do you go with new sets
Mhm.
in the Kraglorn trials anyways? You know what I mean? So and what everybody uh asks for, which is usually cosmetics, at least on the high end, because you kind of have already gotten a lot of the sets you're going to get. Although some of the we try to come up with new things that players are going to want in situational uses and stuff like that. But cosmetics take quite a bit of time to do as well, and a lot of those times it would be splitting between the new cool thing and people want value for what they're buying,
Mhm.
whether it's new skins or new mounts in trials, new motifs that you're going to get as you collect in the overland and in the new content dungeons, trials, and stuff like that. So it would be splitting that time between that and kind of this old piece of content that really is only going to hit a smaller amount of players. So it's kind of like, you know what I mean? It's like it's a big pie, and there's a
Right.
lot of pieces to it, and it's not easy to just say, oh, we just add a third mode and then have no underlying aspects to it, because we'd be spending a whole lot of time. So that means whenever it's kind of finite in game design. So whenever you do something, you take something away.
Right.
So if we're going to do this, that means we potentially won't get something else down the road. So we have been throwing our weight behind, let's give players value for the things that they're going to their ESO plus when they get their dungeon packs and their DLCs. If they're buying a chapter, getting them the best experience possible in all of the pieces of the chapter that they're
Mhm.
going to get. So we want to do that. We want to provide that value, because the minute we start taking away from those other things, people are going to be like, man, this chapter just had so much less than the other one, because you know yeah, they buffed up the Kraglorn trials and gave me one new cosmetic, but then I didn't get stuff out of the chapter, and then why did I have to buy it? And you know what I mean? Like, we want to give that value for players on the stuff that they're going to be purchasing.
Okay. And well, I guess we might as well talk about this because we're on this topic about reward systems and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you're more than aware of like my feelings in regards to the matter, or maybe other people's feelings. Not even just endgame players, but also just players in general, or content creators that aren't really raiders. That they feel that the reward system in ESO seems to be that there's no actual reward structure to it, really. Like in the sense of what players want to see. For example, people are wondering, well, why is there suddenly no skins in Rockru or Dreadsail? Why is there, can we go back to, I don't know, like Kraglorns and maybe give a skin there or something like that? A lot of people kind of look at the Crown Store and say, well, that's a lot of cool stuff, but I want to try to earn this in the game. And I think a lot of people were really happy with the Ebon Dwarven mount. I think that came out with Antiquities, and they loved earning it by looking, and scrying for it, excavating it. People love the Godslayer mount because they have to work hard and earn it. People, I think, have warmed up to the
Necrotic Core as
Planesbreaker
well.
mount. Yeah, and people are excited about the new mount as well. So I guess a question here is like, do you guys ever see like maybe re-adding or reworking the reward structure for trials or stuff like that?
So as far as skins are concerned, you mean as opposed to body markings?
Right.
Um, uh, those two things are largely the same as far as development time is concerned.
Okay.
So part of why we moved towards body markings in the two trials was largely because they oftentimes will work with a skin, so
Mhm.
you can kind of combine those two. But I have heard people saying, well, I want a skin and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and that's absolutely something that's good. That's another aspect of saying, feedback matters, is people are saying, no, I don't want a body marking, I want a skin. Okay, we could look at that in
Yeah.
the future when we do new trials or new dungeons, stuff like that. And if people are saying, I'm not feeling the body markings and I would rather have a skin, that's absolutely something we can look at for sure. As far as adding it to older content, that would take, again, this is where I talk about like all the pieces of that pie, right? Where it's like, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, well, I'm going to do this, because now you have a whole new achievement system that you have to do. And that messes with a lot of the older achievement progression that we had in the game. And you know what I mean? Like, there's just so many pieces into that. Yeah. And again, you add something in older content and you potentially take something away for newer content and stuff like that. So, yeah, so that's I don't envision us going back and adding that in the future. But as far as feedback about what resonates with you, mount rewards, skins as opposed to body markings, that kind of stuff, that's very good feedback that we will take to heart.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
I mean, I'd definitely like to see like the weekly trial stuff maybe give something else.
Right.
So, I mean, we've kind of farmed all those sets now, right? So, yeah. I mean, maybe that one's due an update. If I could pick just one.
Yeah. We could take a look at that for sure.
Yeah.
It's such a like, I agree with you on a lot of points there, Mike, for sure, because it's such a complicated discussion to have. I mean, like, because I understand the players and devs on this one. For example, the players, they have this sense where, you know, the rewards aren't enough. It's not really interesting. I mean, you know, the whole thing with the kinds of just memento versus the mount. I'm sure you know. We talked about it.
I felt bad because I was one of the people that pushed for that memento. I thought it was like cool. And
it's cool.
Came out, they're like,
I like it.
Yeah, it's cool. This is trash. You didn't get a mount. And I was like, man, I'm sorry. I thought it was a cool reward. I'm sorry.
I think it's cool, but
this is where it kind of comes down to like we don't have a silver bullet all the time. Sometimes we're gonna do stuff and we're like, this is gonna be cool, and then it comes out and at that point, I can't, you know, there's no going back with that. There's so much art time and so much development time that went into that it was kind of like. But we tried it, and then we hear kinds of these people are like, no, we like the mount. And if you saw, both Rockgrove and Dreadsail both have a mount. And we're like, we're not making that mistake again. I'll tell you that one. So.
But I can see the player sense of like, oh, you know, the trial leaderboards, whatever. What about where's the dungeon leaderboards, and what do I get really for playing the content over and over again? But at the same time, I also understand the dev point or the dev perspective, kind of on this. Like, okay, let's say we add skins or something to the old content or the new content. That's not gonna solve the issue of perhaps incentivizing players to do it consistently. It's not a perennial reward in the sense that, okay, I go in, I farm the sets, I'm done the sets, I got the skin, I did the hard mode, I got the trifecta, now what? Right? So I think there needs to be some sort of perennial kind of reward system where we're not just earning a skin or a mount, we also are earning something that we can use constantly. And one of my points that I brought up, at least in feedback to the other devs, was, well, why don't you concentrate on transmute stones, right? Like, how much do trial weeklies give you? 10 compared to 10 from a random normal, 1 per character. I mean, it's kind of like lopsided. And that's what I meant earlier about the lack of reward structure, like the lack of consistency that a lot of players, I think, see and want to see that they can earn more stuff. So yeah, I definitely agree with you on a lot of points. And I can also kind of, like, of course, as a player, feel players' pain points on this one too.
Yeah.
I feel like it's going in the right direction though. Like the Tales of Tribute ones, I really like those rewards actually, because you get a lot of stuff. You get transmutes, you get a couple of recipes and stuff.
There's also, as we add more systems, and this touches on kind of the other teams and stuff. But as we add more systems, we add Tales of Tribute, we add antiquities, we add the transmute stones and stuff. That opens up more faucets for us to open up that kind of thing, you know, because now we have more currencies. We have other things like leads that we can offer. We have all kinds of different things we could do potentially.
Right.
That lend into that, and that every time we do that, we add those kind of things. That is a good potential source for us to take a look at and mine in the future to say, hey, you know what? People want more rewards. Maybe this is how we can do it.
Yeah, it's very complicated, I think, for sure. I don't envy you the job of doing it, obviously, because, for example, like one of the reward faucets, as you say, is right now item sets. Right, we do 2 dungeon DLCs every year, and each dungeon DLC has
Four sets.
Four sets,
sets,
including the monster set per dungeon, so it's 8 sets. Plus the chapter DLC, which has 3 craftable sets and 3 overland sets, plus the 4 trial sets.
Yep.
And that's not even including non-perfected version or perfected version. So on the Devon, it's like, how are you gonna, it's so much work.
I don't envy the item set team in particular, because that team is the fact that they can consistently kick out things that are rewarding for players and enticing for players. It just boggles my mind, because there's so much that they go through and they take a look at and have to kind of factor in all the different sets, and having this encyclopedic knowledge of all the sets we have and what they've done before and stuff like that it's pretty awesome. And it's funny, because when we're in pre-production and they're kicking it, they don't just kick out like 4 sets. Like for a trial, they don't come to us and say, here's the 4 set.
Okay.
That is absolutely not what happens. They say, hey, we were thinking for the heavy armor set, here's the tank versions, here's the support versions, here's this. For the healer sets, or for this is what this is, this is what this is. They come up with, 8 versions of each type, of each heavy support, heavy healer, range DPS. It's insane how much they come up with. And I'm like, man. And then they kind of put all those stuff on the backlog and say, okay, well, this doesn't work. Or sometimes we'll look at something and we'll say, yeah, this kind of makes more sense for PvP, or they'll come up with a PvP set and we'll say, that might make more sense for a trial or a dungeon or something like that. So they're constantly shifting around and keeping an idea of what these sets are in the past. So it's amazing that the amount of ideas they do come up with at all.
No, I like that there's like a little bit of balance as well, because obviously we had as a Vicious Ophidian, and then we had False God, which is like Magicka version of it. We had Basai, now we've got like sort of Stamina Basai. I think it kind of keeps things a bit fresh, but without having to like learn a whole new system or completely unbalance everything.
Yeah, but to my perspective, if item sets are part of the reward system here, because why else would you, to a player, why else would you buy a DLC? Oh, you got new sets, you got new content, right? But beyond that, like, the challenge I think here is also like, if you have to keep adding new sets, even craftable sets, and that's a huge pain point for guilds now, because they have like 1,000 crafting stations and because they want to decorate, right? There's like I think there's a certain like breaking point at which I think even on the dev end, it's kind of like, well, how do we dig ourselves out of this hole that both the players and devs kind of made? Like, item sets are rewards, but at the same time, it's like there's so many now, and it's probably a huge pain in the ass to kind of go back and rework the old sets and kind of think of new ways to kind of make players use these sets. And I think maybe looking at the reward system here would probably like alleviate some of those pain points for both the devs and the players, in my opinion, for sure. Because I think what's interesting, like a really interesting thought experiment for you guys here, I think on the podcast, if you could, what would you offer besides item sets as rewards? It's a hard question, because we're so ingrained with this, like in this mentality that every DLC we have to have item sets. So like, what other rewards could you fathom? So I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah, because I mean, like, cosmetics and stuff are nice, but like you say, they're not repeatable, and you want stuff that you want to be able to do every single time.
Exactly.
It's
be nice, but
to not put it too fine, dev time wise, a cosmetic is going to be a lot more time than an item set. Just in that, we can kind of put in item sets and do what we need to do and stuff like that, and a lot less time than it would take for an artist to make all these cosmetics. So yeah, it's for sure. It is an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah. How many more years before they run out of ideas, I wonder? It's a ticking
probably
time
a
bomb.
while. I mean, if they're doing, if Finn is, if Finn is saying they're coming up with 8 versions of a set for each set,
yeah, I know.
I'm just saying to myself, okay.
They recently started with the 12-piece sets as well. So
yeah,
that's like another 10 years at least. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. But yeah, what is it? I guess do you have a particular boss fight or encounter that is your favorite? Whether it's from a dungeon or trial or both, even.
I get asked that so much. It's pretty funny.
Really?
So they're gonna be from different what depending on what I'm looking for. Like one of my favorites visually is always the Mad Architect from Vault of Madness, just because
Okay.
the visual presentation of the windows blowing out, you know what I mean, and then getting sucked back in and stuff. Like I always thought that was such a cool effect that we did. The Warrior is a good example of that kind of aspect too, when he builds the shy and then it blows out the walls and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Mechanically, I really love a lot of the new stuff we've done, but I also think like the whole package dungeons, I would probably say like Black Drake Villa is one of my favorite. Depths of Malatar is another really favorite of mine. Actually, the final boss of Depths of Malatar is absolutely fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Just the whole aspect of you have this kind of one fight you're doing, and then you get blown into the colored rooms, and you have a whole different aspect of that. The team is blessed with so many great designers that it's really tough to put. Really tough to put. So I would say, I guess whatever the latest stuff is my favorite.
Okay.
What's your least favorite? There we go.
What's your least favorite? I know
any
my
of
least favorite
Any of the ones that I personally did.
Really? Which ones?
Not really. But I mean, it's funny because some of the original stuff. So, when I started 10 plus years ago, the game was going through a shift in what we were trying to do and stuff. So we started from scratch on all the dungeons. So the very first dungeon that I worked on as a senior designer was Spindle Clutch. So I did some of the initial boss works on those, did a lot of the quest stuff and stuff like that. So yeah, those were all kind of trash. But
I like the circle around you, that if you walk through it, you blow up. That's pretty fun.
Yeah,
that
that's
gets
fun.
people.
Yeah, and it's there's a lot of I didn't actually do the bosses in those. I did a lot of the content design and stuff like that. I think one of the bosses that actually we talked about it earlier was the twins, which was one of the bosses that I personally did. Least favorite ones would be the ones that aren't quite as interesting, and I think that's why you would probably look to the earlier dungeons, because those were built in a time before we knew how players were going to play the game and what we could expect out of players. So as we've gotten better, and as players have gotten better, and they've learned how to play the game a lot more, we've really honed and refined our craft. And I mean, from the original dungeon team, we have all new designers.
Right.
None of the original designers are still in the dungeon team. So,
Yeah.
other than me, but so yeah.
What I want to know is who did that big empty room in what's that dungeon where you push the boxes?
Oh, Moongrave Fane.
Moongrave Fane. Before the last boss, there's a very long corridor with nothing in it. It looks really nice, but there's no monsters in there.
Maybe he wants you to look at the walls and the design and the aesthetics of it. You know.
Which one are you talking about?
Like just before the last boss, there's like a huge, big, long corridor, and there's some monsters at the end.
Oh yeah.
Before that, there's nothing.
So part of that is, sometimes we'll do things to give you breathing room for the story. And that has an aspect. I believe that there's a lot of voiceover between the boss and the dragon and stuff like that happening while you're running through that thing. And we wanted to give you that story beat and that story element without throwing combat at you. Because if you do that, if you go through there and you're fighting, you're not going to hear anything. You're not going to understand the story part, that story aspect that's going on. So a lot of times we'll do that for that reason. And sometimes we just want to give players a breather for pacing. To allow them to kind of like, oh, I did a thing and that was cool, and now I get to take a small breather to run to the next section.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. I mean, I thought maybe someone had just forgotten to put something there, but
no, that was honestly the story beat. Yeah.
I love what you guys did with Celine, by the way. Like the way you continue
Celine's
the story.
One of my favorites. That dungeon is. That dungeon was, as a senior content designer, that dungeon was the first Celine Webb, who is you talk about when we talk about designers signing themselves up for a lot of work.
Yeah.
That was one of those ones that I did for myself because when we went into it, and I was like, oh, this is what it's going to be. You're going to have 8 Mages Guild members. They're all going to have their own personalities. You're going to lose them slowly as you go through, and only Warlock Corindon at the end and stuff. So we did this whole like design stuff, and that was a lot of work to get all of those aspects to kind of fit. And I like to say, oh, it's my magnum opus because I really loved building that from scratch and all the little theater moments and going through and doing all these things and NPCs coming in and out and then dying and stuff and then Warlock coming in. And then that awesome just twist at the end, spoiler alert, that awesome twist at the end was so much fun. So that when we did Lair of Marsalok and we came up with the idea for Lair of Marsalok, I was like, oh, we have got to be... But because that time, by the time we got to Lair of Marsalok, Celine had become this kind of like fan favorite, are we the baddies moment, right? Where they were like, and then so to revisit that and to say, no, let's tell her story and get a better kind of like resolution to it, so people don't feel like such jerks. But it was funny. I remember seeing some of people's initial reactions when they got into Lair of Marsalok, and then Warlock Corindon shows up, and people are like, "This asshole," you know what I mean? Like that guy was like, "Yeah, I know."
Yeah.
So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I love how you brought her back, for sure, for an additional kind of story branch, like yeah, for sure. I'm wondering if you have any plans for other characters, like, you know, go back to the Mad Architect or the 3 people who were responsible for the Mad Architect's, you know, downfall. Like, I feel like there's something there too, you know what I mean? Like, because they have to stay behind and kind of work something out, like that guy says. I think he says something like, "We always figure things out" or something. So yeah.
So we always look to for places that we can use previous NPCs that we've used before. I can't say that we have any plans right now for anything in particular because, like, why would I tell you?
Exactly.
But we always are looking for avenues, and yes, a lot of those original, especially a lot of those original dungeons, were built from an open-ended concept of to say there potentially could be more to this story that we would explore in the future. So we try to do that whenever possible. So pretty much nothing is off the table as far as who we would use.
Oh man, yeah. Going back to Lair of Marsalok. Oh man, I hate that place.
I think I don't mind it, but there's a lot of running in that one as well.
There's
a lot of running in that one.
It's not just the running; it's just the time gates on the bosses. Like, you know, you can kill it, so why are you making me do this?
Yeah.
And this is actually pretty interesting because it kind of goes back to that earlier conversation we had about the dev response to how players did the content. Like, and it's a work in progress all the time. And I felt like it was 2019. I felt like with Sunspire and Lair of Marsalok, the dev response to, I guess, like, you know, people getting more familiar and more skilled in the game was kind of putting these time gates to like prevent them from burning through too quickly. Or was that not part of your considerations?
Somewhat. I mean, each design is going to be done a little bit different. It's going to be based on the kind of the designer doing it. So, and if that's a focus of the designer, then yeah, they'll put it in there, and that could have been part of that. I don't know. That was what, 3 years ago? Yeah, I almost said last year because it's just
last year. Yeah, it feels like last year.
Yeah. So that was so long ago that it's really tough to know what was going on in the mindset kind of the designer that was doing it. But I do believe there was a conscious effort at that time to say. I mean, you can even see it in a Moon Hunter to some regard too. At the end of that, where it was like your high DPS ends up being a detriment in that because you started getting too many ads and stuff like that. Whereas kind of there was a focus on that from some aspects of design to say, hey, you know what, high DPS is getting out of control. Let's see what we can rein this in a little bit. And again, when we talk about refining our stuff, if you look at how we did it in. Because it's kind of an aspect of the first bosses in Dreadsail Reef. Because if you go full ham on that, you're going to get astronauts. You have all kinds of shit going on. So it's kind of refining that, where you can put it together and you can see it and you can go, okay, and we've disguised isn't the right word, but we've made that more manageable. So even if you have high DPS, you could still say, okay, I know where I need my breaks and stuff like that, and I can still go ham, but in the right location.
Yeah, that's fair. That's pretty cool. Going back to an earlier thread as well, have you, and this is kind of going back to the older content, but not in terms of rewards, but have you guys ever considered going back to older content and introducing like some adjustments to, I guess, some older trials? I know for Sanctum Video, after that Stonebreaker troll was bugged for patch or two, the Poison Blast, you guys not reintroduced, but like you made that much more potent to where if somebody does a poison on them, they just blow up the group, which I found pretty funny. And also, yeah, I think it's funny. I think it's hilarious. And also, a lot of people bring this up, and I think a lot of people brought this up with Rich. Dragon Star Arena, people are just want to like speed it up a bit more because there's a lot of dialogue and stuff like that. Is there any plans to revisit content in that kind of fashion?
We can. What's funny about the troll in Sanctum Video was it was literally a bug fix. It was somebody taking a look and saying, hey, this thing doesn't fire right or something like that, and making an adjustment, and then we're like, okay, and then it doesn't. Of course, nobody's testing Sanctum Video on PTS, so it was a little bit too potent, and then it came out, and people were like, oh my gosh, and we're like, oh we need to take a look at that. So yeah, that was honestly where that came from, and then we kind of went back and we adjusted it down and stuff like that. But as far as older stuff like Dragon Star, we could take a look at quality of life. The cycles that we have to take a look at, we have to manage that time on kind of like going back to those previous content. One of the first initiatives that we had where we really dedicated a lot of time to, because we had some what we call free cycles for the designers to tackle, was the encounter and progress stuff. And that was mainly because that's going to be a bigger impact quality of life change for players than any changes to Dragon Star Arena. But a lot of these feedback notes and where people come and say, hey, you know what, this doesn't quite feel right or something like that, they all go into a backlog, and then we just manage that, and it's parsed out to people, and as we get time to kind of tackle those things, we can. We also have to triage them based on time, like adjusting the timing in Dragon Star is a major cascading effect for the entire arena. So we have to treat that delicately. Right. Part of it is an internal thing where our tech has gotten better and we've gotten more tools, but these are built in an old way. So going back and sometimes taking a look at old content and saying, man, this is just not done this way anymore.
Right.
I can fix this, but I have to rescript the entire dungeon. Right. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, well, do we have enough time to do that? A good example of that is Frostvault. So we made some changes to that the laser boss that was absolutely obliterating everybody in Frostvault at some time. So, but part of that is us taking a look, and that needed a substantial amount of rescripting, but it was such a pain point for players that we were like, let's dedicate some time to go ahead and doing this. And that part of that's born out of completion rates, where we kind of take a look and say, this is, this one's really low. But it was also that was the hindrance in the dungeon. Like, you get up to this point, it's like, people are moving along and they're doing really well, and then they get to this, and this is a hard blocker for players, and we're like, we really need to adjust this. And I know there were some people that came in and said, like, you nerfed it into Oblivion, and this is now way too hard or way too easy and all this other stuff. And I appreciate the people that did things the hard way, but the hardest boss in the dungeon should not be the middle one. Right? So generally, when we make those adjustments, it's to get people kind of through so that they get a natural escalation of stuff. And we have to make that hard choice to say, we're just going to tone this fight down so that people can get through that.
Can you nerf the avalanche thing? Because I still can't tank that. I can't do the dance around it. I die every single time.
No.
Okay, fine. I refuse to tank that dungeon. I just can't get it.
I guess that's more complicated by going back to the old content, especially with you guys are re-architecting the server and code and all that. That's probably something you
It's
take one piece at a
primarily like
time.
it's primarily like tools changes and how we build things
Okay.
now, where as we get new tools additions and stuff to make things a lot easier. But the other stuff was like we didn't have an effective way to do this with a new tool, so we kind of brute forced our way to do it, and it came out great. But it was like now it's a spider web of scripting and stuff. So to unravel all of that stuff, it gets to be this situation of like, ooh, I need to spend quite a bit of time to unravel all this stuff so that I can put it all back together in a way that makes more sense. A good, like I mentioned, the boss in Frostball, and that's one of those things where Jared, one of our designers there, took a look and he says, "Oh, I saw how this ability was built, and I had him do an evaluation, and he came back and he said, this is how I want to fix it." And he listed all the things that he wanted to do to adjust it to kind of bring it more in line with kind of modern standards and stuff. And we did that, and it ended up being, I personally think it's a way better experience than it was before, even though it's not quite as hard. But it ended up being not quite the roadblock it was, and that's where we kind of have to make this choice. We have to evaluate things, say this is what we want to change, and this is how long it's going to take us, and do I have the time to do it?
Right. Yeah. Speaking of better tools, yeah, things must have changed a lot since the initial development. I mean, 2014, even probably since 2018, right? Because I think I was watching these interviews that Matt Fear did this past year, and he was talking a lot about how you guys have more better tools. You guys are always constantly updating the game engine, which players don't know because they always say, "Oh, you just get a new engine."
Get a new engine.
Get a new engine.
2 lines of code. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. So it's really interesting. Like, I guess could you give us some insight on what these better tools are? Are they just like better, like
really tough to
summarize,
put down? So when we launched the game, we didn't have a thing called instance controllers, which is this overarching scripting mechanism that we use for instances and stuff like that. So it's a lot of like inside baseball back end stuff, but it allows us to manage and plug together fights in a much more efficient manner without having to use. Part of it is also like a visualization thing where we'll take things that we used to do in a half dozen or a dozen different defs, which are like internal like scripted things, and it puts it together in a visual representation that makes it way easier to see what's happening. So you don't have to open up so many different windows. You don't have to open so many different lines of things so that you can kind of like visualize things from a bigger snapshot. And that's tremendous for us to be able to kind of look at things. And sometimes it's back end stuff for like I said, it gets really specific and kind of like esoteric. It's not going to be really explained, but it allows us to they add things to some of our defs and stuff like that allow us to script in a more efficient manner without having to check back against a bunch of different things. And that has a couple of cascading effects. It allows us visually to script a lot easier and a lot faster because we can put things together a lot faster. But it also allows a lot less overhead on the server, so the server doesn't have to call back check so much to the server to say, am I doing this right? What am I checking this against? And all that other stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of like our tools team is really kick-ass. I actually have a standing meeting with our tools team every week where we talk about the updates that they're planning, and they are asking for pain points that we have and stuff like that we can make our lives easier and stuff. So it is, it's a pretty cool process, and they're really dedicated to making this, giving us all the tools we need to make like better and better content. So
you're still using Visual Studio 2010. That's what I was using at college.
Okay, buddy.
It's all of our stuff's proprietary now. We're not using any.
I bet you use GitHub though. Still.
Well, the programmers do for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, man, that's funny. Okay. So, I guess while we're on this topic of coding improvements to the game, many people recently have attested to a significant improvement to performance in Cyrodiil and PvP, which is has been met with a lot of great enthusiasm. Will PvE also kind of see benefits from, I guess, the upgraded technology, or I guess the server hardware and stuff like that?
The server as a whole does. So, like, NA, I actually saw it. I think you guys have well, not all of it, but Nevis, you saw it in trial performance should have gotten quite a bit better.
Yeah.
Because it's not just we replaced the Cyrodiil zone.
Right. It's the entire thing. Yeah.
That works. It actually has a cascading effect across the entire server. PvP was the primary way you saw it, and that's just because of how PvP is built and everything that goes into those zones.
Right.
But every zone should have a performance uptick and be better. So yes, you should actually already see it in trials and dungeons and stuff like that. PvP also has the added aspect of there's a lot of players in Cyrodiil, which means this is the fact that I talked about, which you're going to see it there first because there's just more players, there's more calls, there's more everything. Whereas in a trial, it's 12 people. That's all you're going to see. You probably would see a bigger increase in the overland zones in a really heavily populated overland zone like High Isle, for instance, that just came out. You probably see a better performance gain in that place than you would even in a trial. But the trials will have better performance as well.
Okay, that's terrific. Yeah.
When's it coming to EU? Is there a date?
Oh my goodness.
That's not my question.
Yeah.
I don't control it.
You guys don't deserve it anyway.
NA's had more server downtime recently though, so I guess it's fair.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair exchange. I guess going back to how you guys like parse through data from like how people cleared things and I've also noticed this over the years, even before I guess I've met you. Like when you guys are kind of toning down the values and stuff, or the power level of the bosses in like older content, like White Gold Tower. I think there was Bloodroot Forge. Like I guess
no synergy in Imperial City Prison anymore.
What synergy? Oh, the Lord Warden fight.
Yeah,
right. Like, how do you determine that? Like, I guess can you see everything? Like what people do, what button they press?
Or not press.
Yes and no. We could see a lot of what players are doing in their builds and stuff like that, and part of it comes from overarching data. We also have logs that show you what killed you. Right. How often you're dying to it, how often this thing is killed as opposed to not this thing.
How often people are clearing content. I think that's a big thing, right? Right.
A lot of the initial stuff was definitely like that's our first blush thing that we look at is we're like, just give me snapshots of the completion percentage for bosses and stuff like that, and we get a good snapshot from that. It's a bit deceptive, and you have to kind of dig into the content because like a lot of times you'll see like an early boss have a really low completion percentage, and then an end game let's say in a 3-boss structure, boss 2 will have a really low completion percentage, but then boss 3 will have a high one. But that's probably due to the people that on the second boss, and we can actually see the number of people that are actually completing it too. So in that third number is much lower than the second boss, and that's because people are dying on the second boss over and over again and then quitting out. And then the people that can complete the second boss are then completing the third boss. So oftentimes when we make these adjustments to like, we're going to make this boss a little bit easier, make that little boss a little bit easier, then the completion rate for the third boss gets lower because more people can get to it that couldn't do the thing. So it's a bit of a kind of like taking a look at the data and seeing where people are getting hit and seeing what people are getting killed by. So our first blush is to look at the completion rates, and then it's what's killing players, and that gives us a targeted kind of area to say this either needs to be messaged better or is doing too much damage, or people are just getting overlapped with this and getting caught by this, and let's take a look at where we can make those adjustments.
Yeah, I think giving that insight, I think a lot of players are always wondering, why did they nerf VHOF, or why did they, blah blah blah. And, I usually always say like to them, it's probably clear rate or something like that. Yeah. And you want to make it a bit more accessible to the point where like not just intermediate or more experienced players do it, and that will also help us too.
It's also why you see less adjustments to hard modes. Right. But you do see adjustments to veteran modes and stuff like that. Yeah. Because hard modes are where we are like kind of gloves off. Now, if you're talking sub
Mhm.
1% clears on hard modes, then we'll probably make adjustments and stuff like that. But for the most part, you're going to look at you know, veteran clears versus hard mode clears, and you know, if veterans are in the 3% range and stuff like that, you're like,
Mhm.
but it's also partly like the age of the content too. Like a brand new thing that comes out where people are learning how to do it,
Right.
clears are not going to be that high, so those percentages are not going to be that high. So we also kind of try to take a step back with some things. This is the funny part about PTS is we will get, and Oliver knows this because last year when we did Rock Grove,
Mhm.
we had launched the hard modes, and I believe it was 2 days after the hard modes launched
Right.
that Ollie told me, these are impossible. Nobody's ever going to get the speed. Nobody's ever going to get the trifecta.
You couldn't
And
set
it
out
was
to do
funny
the
because
first
I was
boss
like,
without dying.
No.
yeah, and it was funny
Wait, you
because
said that?
I remember he did, and
Come
I
on,
remember I was
Ollie.
in his stream, and I replied to him. I was like, it's the second day.
I give up.
Come on, Ollie.
You know what I mean? Like, so that's the kind of thing of like we just have to take a look at the age of the content, how
Right.
if players have learned how to figure it out and stuff like that. So we actually have to have discussions as designers when we talk about these kind of things to go, all right, you know, are we going to make any adjustments? And somebody's like, well, this is this, and I'm like, but it's only this old. We want to wait for a week. This is also why you see initial PTS hard mode stuff, and then when that next week comes out where the hard modes stuff, and we haven't touched some of those things initially because we're like, let's give it a little more time to breathe. Let's give it a little more time to see if players have figured out how to do this and how often it takes them to learn things before we start just going in and kind of
Right.
cutting it up and making some big adjustments.
So as a, what would you say time frame wise? That's like 2 patches, maybe 3 patches.
It depends on
It
on the
depends,
piece.
right.
But yeah, it depends
Yeah.
on the piece. But yeah, we're at least giving you at least a full week. 2 weeks.
Yeah, Ollie, come on, give it a
No,
week.
nerf it immediately.
Yeah, nothing immediately, hardly ever.
Yeah. I guess like how tight's the scheduling of all that? Like with patch notes and stuff. Like because you guys, I mean ESO, a lot of people come to ESO and they're like, wow, there's so much content, and there's always so much more content every single quarter. I mean, it must be like really
There
tight
is.
in terms of the schedule balancing and making like the changes to the content too.
Right.
Like how often can
Yeah.
you really do that? Honestly.
Our schedule's going to fluctuate
Right.
during the year.
Right.
Based on where we are. Sometimes there's more opportunity for to do it. Like if we're in a documentation type phase, it gives us a little bit more opportunity to kind of take a look at some of those things and make those adjustments. We actually have dedicated time when things are on PTS to say, usually I tell my designers, let's gather up the feedback and then dedicate 1 or 2 days to kind of like calling out the adjustments, making the adjustments, and then going forward and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then to give us a little bit of time to watch streams and see what's with the feedback that we're getting before we actually go in and start making these changes. But we do have dedicated time while it's on PTS to make adjustments. So it's the benefit of, it's one of the benefits of the Dungeon and Trials team, Dungeon Trials and Arenas, because we are so focused on the end game that we need to have kind of that time to dedicate to make sure this balance is right. Whereas
Mhm.
if you look at the Overland teams and stuff like that, a lot of times their reactive feedback is bugs or slightly too hard things and stuff like that we need to adjust down. But they don't have quite the emphasis on balance.
Okay. Do you think that's a bad thing or a good thing in terms of balance? Like, because you said earlier for hard mode, you just take the gloves off and you just smack the heck out of players. So, like, do you ever like get concerned about how would players transition from not just veteran to hard mode, but also from overland to normal dungeons or
Trials,
veteran trials?
Yeah,
Stuff like
so normal balance is a very big concern. I think that we have. It's really what that comes down to is it's much easier for us to test normal balance.
Okay.
In the context of everybody that plays the game, it's way easier for us to test normal balance
Right.
because we don't need people that are as well versed in the game in order to test it. So that's an advantage for us to people like to get testing for that. So it's a bit easier for us to kind of do that. But it is a very real concern for us to say, is this hitting the right note for normal? But again, those balance concerns when we're testing that stuff in dungeons and trials is a lot easier to make adjustments. Like this killed me and I don't know why and stuff. Like, okay, well, let's take that back and dial it back a little bit, and maybe that doesn't kill you anymore and stuff like that. And we can allow those kind of things where we just take it down a lot of notches right at once.
There's a boss in Southern Elsewhere, the one with like those 4 fire mages. That kills like 20 people every single time. How did that get through?
Group bosses are a little bit different in that, and actually, Elsewhere was a one of those ones that there was a dedicated effort by our designers doing the group bosses to really, really kind of push the envelope a little bit. Some of those group bosses are pretty tough, but we wanted that. Elsewhere had a lot going for it. It had the dragons, it had the group bosses, it has. And so there's just a lot going on in Elsewhere, and those what I'd say as far as overland difficulty, some of those group bosses trended to be very, very difficult. What was funny was, and let me tell you this is a cool story. So, 2019, I was at E3,
right?
Okay, and we're showing off the game, and some kid comes over to our booth from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and he wants to play. We were playing live. We were playing on our convention accounts, but we were playing live. And he comes and sits down on his computer, so I'm sitting next to him. I'm like, all right, cool. We're gonna do this. This is how you kind of play. He's never played ESO before in his life. This is how you're gonna play and stuff like that. So he sits down like this, and he walks up, and he runs straight for a group boss. And the group boss isn't up yet, but there's a lot of people standing around, and I'm like, oh, no, man, he's gonna get in here, he's gonna die. And I see him scanning the crowd, right? And I look, and who do I see sitting in that crowd waiting for that group boss to spawn? Gilliam the Rogue. So I instantly grab my phone and I start messaging Gil, and I'm like, Gilliam, I was like, this kid right here is going to play this thing. He's making wish. He's at the booth at E3. Do not let him die. And he goes, I got it. And no shit, I swear to God, they're sitting there playing, and he is like on this kid's hip, and he is like, does that. They killed this group boss. Kid had a blast, and Gilliam the whole time was right next to this kid. Did not let him die. It was the best experience I could have imagined. It was so lucky to see him just like pan the ground and see. And I was like, oh, Gil, don't let this kid die, man. So good. So good. It was such a great story. But yes, the Elsewhere group bosses are can be tough for sure.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh my gosh, I was gonna ask this earlier. So it turns out when I was trying out Destiny 2 some time ago, and I was like, man, this looks really familiar. Or like the stuff in Destiny 2, I'm like, where have I seen this before? Like some of the aesthetics or even some of the mechanics. I'm like, I think I asked somebody, and they were like, "Oh, those guys in Destiny, some of them used to work at ZOS." And I was like, "What?" that I found out at that point, like, wow, the game development industry is so small. Like, everyone must know each other. Like, you must know everybody that once you get into it. So, like, in that regard, like, when you are designing these new bosses or mechanics, do you ever look to other games for inspiration, or even like other media, like movies or books or something like that?
Absolutely, all of the above. Okay. Every time we develop a boss or mechanic, I'll dial back. Every time I'm playing a game or watching a show, I have the designer brain in me is always like, that was cool. How did they do that? How would that work in ESO? Because it's the current game we're working on. So I'm like, how would that work in ESO? How would we do that? How would this be fun? What would this look like with a group? That I can say. As a good example, I was watching last night. I was watching. I watched Everywhere, Everything Everywhere All at Once, which, by the way, is like just you can mine the hell out of that for game design ideas. But I was actually watching. I then watched episodes of The Legend of Vox Machina. Okay. which is fantastic for that kind of aspect. Because as you're watching, this is a group of people, and they're fighting monsters and enemies and stuff like that, and there's abilities flying off and stuff like that. So that's another good example of taking a look and saying, that's cool. How would that be done in ESO? So I constantly am doing that. Doesn't matter what game I'm playing, from racing games to Madden to to fighting games to everything, is imagining, that's cool. What would that look like? And then the second one is always, what would that look like in a group setting, and how would that challenge people in a group and stuff like that. So absolutely, and it's everything that whether I watch it or I'm a big movie buff, so it's mainly movies and games that I'll borrow inspiration from. But I've known other designers that have been inspired from like music and stuff, where they are just really into music, and then they get inspiration from that. So yeah, every designer is going to be different, but they're all going to pull from a bunch of different inspiration for sure.
We have to start guessing which dungeon is which movie now. Like.
Morbius for anyone.
There you go. Huh.
It's time to morb.
It's morbid time.
It's morbid time. But yeah.
If an NPC says that in game, you know where that came from.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll look for it. God. But that must be hard too, because now you have to like somehow conform that idea to lore, right? From what you said earlier, or like how it would make sense within the context of the trial, or where the boss is from, like, That's part of it for sure. Yeah. That's
part of it is not just, how do I get space lasers in the game or something like that. It's also like, how would it make sense in the context of the game, and what would that look like? And sometimes it's more like base element brass tacks, where you're deconstructing something from a design element, and you're saying, okay, well, this is an AoE placed here, it comes from the sky, it needs to be this, and then so you may not even recognize that it's a mechanic that you would have seen from another game, because it's not the exact visual representation of that mechanic, but it's the underlying design element that you want to get people to do, or you want to get the experience for. And that's kind of how it's done. And that sounds like I'm some high-minded designer, which is totally bullshit. But it's just a weird way to kind of look and play games and stuff like that. But yeah.
I guess, do you have any guilty pleasures in terms of the books or movies? You say you're a big movie buff. What's your favorite movie?
One of my favorite movies of all time is The Usual Suspects. I absolutely love movies with a twist.
Yeah.
But I love it. Really depends. Like, I'm gonna love film noir stuff. I love movies with a twist. I even love the big popcorn movies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The Avengers movies, all the Marvel movies, pretty much, and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I have a lot of love for all those movies. There's actually a really good old anime series that I have the DVDs of. That shows you how old it was. Record of the Lotus War, which was an absolutely fantastic. If you haven't seen it, it's really good. I think it was the guy who did it was like, it was his D&D campaign, and they just wrote everything down, and then he made an anime out of it. So it was
what's it called? Record of the Lotus War?
Record of the Lotus War.
I'll have to look this up after the podcast for sure.
Yeah, it was really good. It was like I think it was like 8 or 10 disc set or something like that. I still have downstairs somewhere, but it was good.
1993.
Yeah, dude, I'm told you I'm old.
it's whatever. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. I'll have to look this up for sure. I'm gonna watch it. But yeah,
let's watch it now.
Well, okay, buddy. I'm sure Finn has a lot of things to do for his Sunday. I don't want to keep him for too long. Again, I really do appreciate you coming along.
Yeah, no problem.
I guess we'll take some questions from chat, if we have some time here.
I mean, that's risky.
Okay, I'm sure Finn's more than prepared
we'll take
to
some
handle.
Questions
I've already asked him really.
Yeah.
I've asked some really difficult questions already about the rewards. So he's more than ready at this point. How many achievement points does Finn have?
Oh, jeez, I have no idea.
Probably.
Yeah, I wish. I do not have that. I don't know how many points I have. It's really weird because I spread out my characters so much that it's like, I guess with the count wise, you can say I could look, but it's really weird because like I keep forgetting what I've done on some characters. So like I'll go to this thing and I'm like, an NPC will talk like I've never met him before, and I'm like, what are you talking about? We just that was on a different character. That's right. So,
boxers or briefs? What?
Boxer briefs, actually.
Boxers or briefs?
It's really weird. Boxer briefs. I can't.
What's a boxer brief?
It's like a tight boxer.
Like a trunk. I think we call them trunks in the UK.
Yeah, you might call them trunks. I'm sorry, you probably call them like
pants.
periwinkle trousers. I don't. Whatever England called it.
Which is your favorite boss in Origin Dungeons? I think he answered this earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spin the clutch? Was it?
My favorite what?
Your boss in original dungeons, in the base game dungeons.
Oh, no, it was my favorite boss was favorite boss.
Mad Architect. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your favorite class in ESO?
Well, I tank on it. That's going to depend on the role. For tank, I love my Necro. I play my Necro. Like I used to have a Dragon Knight, or I still have a Dragon Knight, but I used to tank exclusively on my Dragon Knight, and then when the Necro came out, I just went all in on Necromancer tank. So I really love it. For ease of use, I really like the Templar. I think it's just a really easy class to kind of pick up and play, and it can do a lot of things really well.
Okay.
But for PvP, I play a Nightblade.
Oh hell yeah!
So
with the hiding cloak or the Healy cloak?
Hiding cloak. Although I am a Magblade, so yeah, it's really weird. I haven't played PvP in a while, so I need to get back into it.
Same. How far do the devs plan ahead for patches? Actually, I think I can answer this question.
I'm working on next year's stuff. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. A lot of people don't understand this, and they get upset over it. But the dev timeline of doing things and the player's perception of that timeline is so wildly different. Even looking at other games, it's insanely. It's just like there's a dissonance there between the two.
I asked Rich on his stream, and I think Rich said like 2 years or something. They've got
that's
stuff
insane.
2 years.
Yeah.
We do, and I'm planning out next year's stuff.
Okay. Any spoilers? Just kidding.
No spoilers.
Yeah, I know.
It'll be out next year. That's your spoiler.
Yeah.
June 6th.
When are we getting another solo right now? Well, that was answered earlier too. So, it's always a work in progress. If we want something changed in the game, what is the best way to vocalize that?
It depends on what you want changed.
So, I guess you're asking for in terms of rewards or stuff like that, or PvE in general.
I mean, feedback on the forums is really good. I know people don't like to go to the forums and stuff like that, but feedback on the forum is really good.
Petition.org.
We have the council raiders as well. That's kind of the
we have council. Yeah, we have some kind of internal things that we count. Right. That's not a lot of like asking for new stuff. It's mainly feedback. So like that kind of stuff. But I would say feedback on the subreddit's a good space. We kind of keep tabs on the forums and the subreddits, Twitter, and all that other stuff. So pretty much any of those avenues that we have, that would be it. We're really, really paying attention during PTS on feedback stuff. So not that we're not paying attention any other time, but like there's a lot of hawks on the PTS forums and stuff like that. So ask for stuff during that kind of thing, creating threads and feedback on that is really big on during PTS too.
And also to clarify from the earlier conversation, just point out the problems.
Yep.
Yeah, is the best way to.
But I mean, like asking for things.
Asking for things.
Like what we talked about earlier when you said, "Hey, we really like skins as opposed to body marking," stuff like that. That's all good feedback, and that's not really describing a problem as much as asking for something new. But saying like, "I want this ability to do 5% less damage," and you're like,
"Okay, right, okay."
Tell me what the problem is, and I'll when we can kind of craft a solution to it.
This is a question from Madigan. Has Finn learned anything constructive from Tipsy Trials? Constructive.
Yes, I have, Maddie. That Maddie is a great musical player.
Okay.
Always tooting.
No, honestly, like playing with the players is always great. So I always learn kind of firsthand how you guys look at things, how you guys play things and stuff like that. So that's always good. It's not always just a learning experience kind of thing where I'm going into things and saying, I'm just going to go here and be in work mode and stuff like that. I like to have a lot of fun with tipsy trials and stuff like that. So I get a lot more fun out of it than anything else. But yeah, absolutely learning and seeing how you guys tackle things and challenge things and stuff like that is always stuff I learn.
I'm always surprised how competent they are. Like, I always expect streamers to just be like running around picking up flowers and stuff. And then
I mean, sometimes that happens. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes that happens. We had a couple times in trials where I think Code explained quite a few of the mechanics, and then people were like, "I wasn't listening. Let's go." So,
oh dear.
Is Finn's basement, aka Dread Cellar, actually based on Finn's basement?
No comment.
No comment. Okay. Let's see.
The big spider. There are spiders in there.
Okay.
Okay. It was introduced as a joke, but are there any ideas for tank weapons outside of Sword and Board, like double shields? I don't think that's Finn's department, so we'll skip that one.
I mean, I would be involved in the discussions if they were going to.
Right. But double shield.
I don't know. I don't know about that thing.
Right.
Touching on when we talked about the pieces of pie and cascading effects.
Right.
It is worth mentioning for people to keep in mind when you talk about stuff like adding weapons and stuff like that. That is that would be an absolutely massive undertaking if that would ever be tried. Because you're talking about re-itemizing the entire game at that point. So like it's one of those things of like just to put perspective on some of these things that we talk about, stuff like that is a massive be a massive task to ever try to tackle anything like that.
How was a 30-minute speedrun decided upon for Dread Cell Reef? I guess
playtesting?
Yeah. Playtesting it? Okay. Yeah. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with QA and how they try to break things, and also like.
And sometimes it's also like, so another aspect to that is, particularly with trial, we can launch something that's too hard.
Mm-hmm.
We can't launch something that's too easy. And what I mean by that is, if something comes out and it's too easy and everybody can do it, I can't cork that genie. I can't go back and say, no, I'm going to make this harder.
Okay.
So even if everybody looks at it and 6 months down the road, we're looking at it and nobody has the speed run, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at that, nobody has the trifecta and stuff like that. That's a situation where we could look at it like, that's probably a little bit too hard, and let's dial it back. Let's make it 32 minutes, 33 minutes, whatever it is that we think that would be right or something like that. But from a design perspective, if I made it 50 minutes and then everybody in the world gets it in 50 minutes, I can't go and say, oh, now I need to make it harder, because that's bad design, and it creates a situation of, well, it's basically asterisks in the records book, right? Of like, well, they did it when it was only 50 minutes, and now I did it when it's 30 minutes, because I can't then take away achievements for players and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's one of those things that, like, even if it comes out too hard, we can still make that adjustment and make it easier later on, where we can't do it the other way.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Sunspire always feeling pretty tight, like with the speedrun on that. So maybe it's just a case of, once we get experience with it.
It's new.
It might,
like Finn
and it
said
also
earlier,
is
it's
brand
new.
new. It's barely been out a week. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a problem with some players today, I feel like, or raiders today. Like, they're a bit too spoiled by high damage, or like, you know what I mean? And then like they expect to get the progression done in like a day or a month. It's like, well, I mean, back in the day, back in my day, we spent 7 months alone for V Maul clear, right?
Well, V Maul was like I said, V Maul took V Maul hard mode took 5 months.
Right, exactly. So it's like, it's insane. It's insane the difference between that time period and today, at least in terms of mentality. How does Finn feel about world record score pushing and the nerfing of damage? I guess he's asking for your personal opinion in regards to score pushing teams. Like, how do you feel about them? I've seen this really cool stuff where the Doom developers sit down and watch like speedrunners go through the entire game, and they're always like amazed by what they can do. Do you ever get that from like the score pushers?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Annoyed that they clear it so quickly.
I don't really get annoyed that anybody clears anything super quickly.
Mm-hmm.
We do watch the videos of people that get trifectas and score clears and stuff like that in the trials to see how they're doing things and how they're tackling things if we didn't see it live. I think it's a cool aspect that exists outside of the developer control somewhat, if that makes sense. In other words, there's not an internal mechanism that highlights anybody that gets the world first or anything like that. And it's one of those things of like, I think it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the development team when you start to really, really emphasize world first. And it's fine if your game does that, and it's fine if your game really, really pushes that and highlights that. But I do think it puts a really tremendous amount of pressure on the development team of saying, this has to be really, really correct right when you start, or you get into a situation like there's a bug that allows you to skip things or allows you to do stuff. Then it's like that bug's got to live there forever. Like you can't clear that person's world first or anything like that. So you just have to have a really, really tight situation of that kind of stuff. That said, we just recently pushed up to our social channels the initial people, as Ollie knows, our initial group of people that were able to tackle and do the trifectas in the dungeons, which I thought was really
great.
Cool.
Yeah.
And it was really, really well received. So I would expect maybe some of that stuff in the future.
I think people would love to see recognition for trials, for sure.
Absolutely.
Whether it's a world first or a server first. I think world first is a little tricky here because console gets the patch later. They don't have PTS. And then you have the matter of, okay, well, PCU typically comes up first. So I think a server first something would be really a good step towards that. And that kind of relates to what we're doing in this server that we're sitting in with the whole Project Vitality thing. We're trying to get more people into raiding just so that we see like a shift in the demographic of people interested in actually doing the veteran trials, so that there's more reason to do it and to get rewards for it, and to hopefully see some changes along down along the road. I think it's hard. It's very hard. But yeah, let's see. Who comes up with the names for dungeons and trial achievements? Oh, this is a pain point, I think. Not a pain point, but like some people always bring this up to me. Why is Mountain God an achievement name, but not the title?
So that's going to be a feedback. Again, this is the other thing I talk about where I said, it's not an exact science. Some things are we'll come up with something and we'll do something, and then we'll get feedback afterwards. I'm like, oh my gosh, this, and we're like, oh, okay, I just didn't see that. You know what I mean? Like, I really thought the Kind's memento was really cool, and then people are like, nah, it's terrible. So, the achievement names are generally created by the fiction designer, the writer designer that is assigned to dungeons for whatever particular piece of content it is. It's going to be who was it for Dreadsail Reef? I think it was Patrick is my writer designer. So all of the names there and stuff like that, and the titles as well. That said, those names should be brought up to the team and the system team as well, so that we can kind of take a look and evaluate those and make sure that they're cool. Basically, we try to kind of take a look and say, oh, that's a really cool name for that kind of thing. So. And they don't feel like as generic and stuff like that. Like that's how we get stuff like Godslayer and stuff, which is like still the absolute best.
I feel like it's very difficult to top that once you come to.
Yeah, it is very difficult to top.
It is without that one. But, I remember.
Go ahead. And so I'm just saying sometimes the titles may not translate out and stuff like that, or we didn't see it right away, and then we get it.
Right, Mountain Terrorizer. Wasn't it? It was TikTok Terrorizer.
Yeah, that was
Terrorizer.
Yes.
I love the Arch Custodian was called a janitor, right?
That Something was like I said that because we had shown a preview. What it was is I think we had pulled people in. We had some influencers and stuff visit the office, and they got a chance to play Halls of Fabrication.
Oh, okay.
And that's what at that time a designer had done a first pass, because that was a designer name where it was called the Janitor and stuff, and then I think it was Outcast that picked up on it and was like, it's the Janitor, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's not called that wasn't his final name. So
I guess you have to pay attention to the acronyms as well, because they might come out as something unfortunate.
Absolutely.
Have you
Actually,
had to
that's one of
change
the
any?
things. Is what'd you say?
Have you had to change any?
Yeah. So one of the things that we talked about with actually dungeon names come up with that too. When we come up with names for dungeons and trials and stuff like that, because we were talking about how players say things. So we're like, hey, I'm going to run this, and we want to make sure that it's not too similar to a bunch of other stuff or stuff like that. You know what I mean? So like, we have Darkshade Caverns and Dreadsail Reef and stuff like that. So those are very different things. Since DSR and DSC sometimes it's just DC. So like we pay attention to the abbreviations for absolutely to make sure that we don't overlap. So if somebody says I want to run this, it's not two different dungeons they could potentially be talking about.
Okay. Vet fuck. Let's LFM vet fuck.
That's the next one.
Speaking of titles, I remember the initial backlash over the Rock Rope titles. Was Stonekissed, I think, instead of Planesbreaker or something like that.
Yeah.
And this time around, I think a lot of people are enjoying Swashbuckler Supreme, just because it sounds funny.
Pretty cool.
It's like a Burger King item. Hey, I like the number 3 with Swashbuckler Supreme side of fries. I think it's funny. Yeah. I think a title has to either be.
It's a Long John Silver's special.
Yeah. I think to players, the title has to be funny or like serious or something like that. Yeah, in the sense.
Yeah, and we try to hit like sometimes there's just sometimes you're just not gonna hit a name that's
right.
Super like yeah. So yeah, sometimes we lean into some of the names, but again, this is where feedback is important. Like you said with the Stonekissed or something changed in the Planesbreaker and stuff. That was very much from feedback on PKS. People saw it and they took a look and they said, this kind of feels or something like that. You're like, okay, well, we go back to the drawing board and we say, now that has bigger implications because when we get to PTS, generally localization has already been done. So any kind of text changes that aren't bug fixes and stuff like that have to go up through our entire localization pipeline to get it to make sense in all the languages that we're in. So there is that kind of knock-on effect, but again, we'll listen to the feedback and we'll push it up. And one title going up to localization isn't a big thing, but rewriting in a quest, for instance, would be a pain in the butt.
Yeah, that was it. The Empire in German is like Pie Kaiser or something. It sounded really funny. But I'm also always fascinated by which title people choose, like whether it's the one for the no death hard mode speedrun or the one with the extra achievements in it. Because like people use Godslayer and not Hand of Alkosh, but then people use what's the one for Kind's Aegis? They use Dawnbringer instead of Kind's Wrath.
Yeah. I think that's just personal preference. Like Godslayer is a really tough one to overshadow. I mean, anybody walking around with Godslayer over their head, that's cool.
I don't know. I think I like Swashbuckler Supreme more. Just sounds.
There you go.
This sounds good.
Yeah, it's a bit more fresh, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. We asked about, I guess, like the world record score pushers, the endgame teams. What do you feel about people soloing dungeons on like the hardest mode? Do you like that or like? It's whatever. You don't care. Because okay.
What I don't want is what I don't want, but what I find funny sometimes is when people complain that they can't solo. That's where I kind of go, but it's not really designed for that. So like if we put in mechanics that you really need 2, 3, 4 people, that's kind of the intent. So like, but if you can solo it, and I see people that do that all the time, like, okay, the more power to you. Most people aren't going to be able to do that. The vast majority of people are going to be able to do that. So if you've kind of pushed yourself and that's where you're getting your challenge for the game, play the way you want.
Okay. All right. A few more questions and I think we'll wrap it up here. What are the chances of a trials group finder? Like a dungeon trials.
Yeah, just the logistics on that makes my head spin.
Right.
I can't. I mean, like I said, we don't rule out anything, but like that would be a massive engineering effort. And I think that there's potentially ways that you could do that without actually what you guys are thinking of. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. What's the lore name of the poison plants on the Reef Guardian boss in Dreadsail Reef? And are they related to the same family of plants as the ones in Maelstrom Arena? That's a good question.
Gosh.
What are they called?
I have no idea. I'd have to look. I'd
Okay.
have to look. I don't even know right off the top of my head. But I'd have to look.
We call
Okay,
them
that's a good
vagina
question.
plants or like butthole.
No.
plants.
You're talking about stranglers. He's talking about the like little
Oh.
things that blow up.
You just-
Okay.
Okay, yeah, he's talking about the poison plants that pop up in
Right.
DMA
The ones,
and
the
the
ones that
Dreadsail.
look like the ones in DMA, right?
Oh man,
I don't know without looking at the
Are they
deck.
like lashes or something? I don't know.
The ones that you're talking about, yes, but
Yeah.
not the poison ones that blow up. The volatile poison ones or whatever.
Oh. Okay.
DMA.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, and I guess
You're
we'll
talking
take
Arena 7, not Arena 3.
Arena 7, right?
Oh. Okay. Yeah. Like the little things on the top of Bulbasaur from Pokemon.
I got you.
All right, I guess we'll take one more question from chat. So let's make it a good one. Oh, there's a lot of people asking about QA stuff, which is interesting to me.
They want to know who's on the team. I'm on the team. But I can't
Okay,
say- can't
no,
say.
that's not what they're asking about. God, okay. Guys, one more question. It's a hard question to pick. There's questions about QA. There's also a question. There's a good question. Okay? So we talked about the trial leaderboards or trial group finder. Is there chances of dungeon scores or dungeon leaderboards?
We don't have a plan for that right now, and that's partly because it's not the type. When you add leaderboards to a thing, it necessarily narrows the focus of what the intent of that thing is. And we want to not steer dungeons in that kind of direction. We want dungeons to be as accessible to people as possible, and we don't want to set up a situation where dungeons are looked at as this super high-end score-pushing type of content.
Okay.
And when you add a leaderboard type situation to that, it potentially pushes it that way, and that's not what we want for dungeons. So that's why we haven't done it yet, and we don't really have any plans to do that right now.
I think it would depend.
But you do have stuff like DSA and Black River Prison and stuff like that. So
I think that would entirely depend on what kind of leaderboard it is, though. Because as it is right now, most people, even if there is a leaderboard system, most people don't care about the leaderboard system, and that kind of ties in with the whole reward thing, right? So if it was very lucrative rewards or something,
yeah, but
like
if you look at the engagement for dungeons is way higher than the engagement for trials, and that's partly because of the stigma, as you know, related
with
to
trials.
to trials and stuff like that.
But another factor with that is it's much easier to get 4 people.
It is.
Than it is to get 12 people, for sure,
there's
like, without doubt.
There's a dungeon finder.
Well, I think that's why people are asking for a trials finder, right? to make it more accessible. So
I know. I'm just
right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it really depends on what kind of leaderboards you're looking at. I think if it's something like benign, without like too much stuff in it, it's just for people who just want to test themselves or test their limits, and I can see it. But if it's something like you said or mentioned, yeah, you could probably introduce.
I think
some
I
sort of
just locked
different
up and lost you. What'd you say?
Oh, I said it. I think that point you made about, we don't want to steer that content in that certain specific direction entirely depends on what you do with that leaderboard. If it's just like some leaderboard where it's just names that without anything really beyond that, I think it would be fine personally. I don't know, because again, as it is right now, most people don't really care about weekly leaderboards or even like PvP leaderboards.
I get you.
Outside of who's Emperor? That's
It's also related to the nature of how development is,
right.
And developing for a leaderboard situation has a certain amount of knock-on effects too. That would yes, it has knock-on effects that bloat development time a little bit too.
Oh yeah. And I think we talked earlier about how much more complicated it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And I'm glad you showed up here to give us more insight into that. I think a lot of people walk away from the podcast kind of like with more knowledge and more understanding. So I think, yeah, for sure. That's
Hopefully
something.
won't type as much angry crap on the forums. It doesn't make any sense.
I think recently there's been a spate of like attacks, like literal, like really bad stuff happening. At least for the Destiny 2 devs recently. It's like you don't. I don't know. It's just really bad.
I will say this. And this is a general comment on game development and stuff. Game developers, we are gamers too,
Right.
and we want to deliver the most fun experience we possibly can. We have a limited amount of time, and we have a limited amount of resources, and it sucks when something comes out and it's not up to people's expectations and it's not up to people's stuff, and we hate it just as much as anybody else does. So we're beating ourselves up just as much as anybody else is. So if nothing else, keep that in mind. That these people are we're trying to do our best, and we are doing what we think is best and in the best interest of the players, and will be the most fun experience. And we don't always hit a home run, and we don't always hit it even inside the park, and sometimes we miss. So if you could provide feedback about what you do or don't like in kind of a not death threat manner,
yes, please.
Then we will take it to heart, and we'll try to incorporate that in the future and balance that against everything else that we're doing and stuff. But that's the biggest takeaway too. And not only that, game design. You mentioned it earlier. Game design is a small field. We have it seems big, but a lot of designers know a lot of other people. And believe it or not, as game designers, we're rooting for all other game designers. I want to play fun games, and it doesn't matter who makes those fun games. I just want the games to be fun. So the more accepting and the more supportive everybody is about game developers, the better games we're going to get.
For sure.
Yeah.
My perfect notes to end on.
Very insightful.
How lovely.
Yeah, I think more people need to hear that, to be honest. It's just I don't know. it's just depressing when I see people like that. I don't know. It's just weird. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to say to anybody listening, Finn?
Enjoy High Isle. It's a really great chapter. We spent a lot of time into it. Go out there, get your Tales of Tribute. I know there was a lot of people that didn't understand Tales of Tribute when it first came out and stuff like that. I know that I waited quite a bit to start playing and stuff like that, but now I'm like super hooked on it. It's really fun. Yeah, it's really, really fun. And High Isle is a really great chapter. And I hope everybody gets a chance to play it.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Have you got any shout outs? What's your Twitch? No.
What's your Twitch?
My Twitch name.
You're on Twitter. You're on Twitter. Go and follow Finn on Twitter.
Oh man. But yeah. But thank you so much again, Finn, for coming on. I appreciate it. Hopefully we can get more devs on the show and get more insight into, like, for the players to understand, and you know what I mean, game development. Yeah. What's really going on. Yeah. Sure, I really appreciate it. A lot of people appreciate it as well, because like we don't really get much time with a dev, and I really do appreciate it. Really,
it's funny because it's one of the best aspects of traveling to shows. I absolutely love to travel to shows and just talk to players, and mainly because it's a lot like this. It's a lot like sitting down, and we all love ESO, and we all enjoy different aspects of it. We can sit down and talk to people, and we can sit down and just have this kind of shared love for a game and talk about it. And we're all real people, and we all, you know what I mean? And so being able to talk to people and stuff like that is one of the biggest laments I've had over the last couple of years, is not being able to travel and not being able to see people and go to shows and stuff. So more we get out of that, get to shows, get to see people and all that stuff. I can't wait.
Great.
All right, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure I don't want to keep you for too long. I'm sure you have stuff to do on Sunday, movies to watch. I want to watch a movie later, for sure.
For sure.
Anyway, I'm going to look up that record of Lola's War. All right.
Yeah.
It's 10:15. Go to bed.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
We'll see you.
Yeah. All right. We just ended the podcast. Easy. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the podcast. And that was the 25th episode of the ESOU podcast. I am hoping to get not just content creators or other people from the community, but also devs in the future. Let me know what you guys think.